actually put on benefit for his legal fees. So when we got Steve out on bail immediately, as soon as they post bail, and he was out on bail for 14 months before they started his trial. In that time, people rallied around us all the time. They were just outraged. They even charged him. It was almost 3 years after the crime happened before they arrested Steve. So I mean, that's how flimsy the case was until they got enough people to lie, and they got enough of their antics that they do, jailhouse snitches and eyewitness testimony and all this other garbage, junk science, that they finally got enough to get an indictment from the grand jury. When Steve was convicted, it was the worst day of my life, on June 2nd. We were so confident that he was never going to be convicted. Every day we would go down on the elevator with our attorney, and we hired the best attorney we had in upstate New York, Salvatore Gibbs, who has since passed away. Every day we'd go down and he'd say, well, nobody murders today, you know. This is all just a bunch of garbage, and they're never going to get conviction, and the newspaper reporters, you know, were all pro-Steve, and they never thought it was going to be a conviction, and the jury went out on Friday, which is a very bad day for a jury to go out. And at 3 o'clock, they certainly didn't want to be sequestered for the weekend, and they came back with a guilty verdict. They didn't mind putting my son away for 20 years. To tell you that I didn't eat or take a drop of food or water for 7 days, I didn't. They were ready to put me in the hospital. I couldn't believe that they took my son away. He was innocent. How could this happen? And through the 20 years, I never had one person come up to me and say, you know, your son's a murderer. They must have had something to convict him on. It was just the opposite. There was never a week that went by in 20 years that people in our town and in the county, if I was in the grocery store, in church, any place, would come up and say, I think about your son all the time. I pray for him every day. I can't believe he's still in prison and what's going on in his case. And we never had anything derogatory. The only thing we had happen was the night they did convict my son, the victim's parents were very good friends with the sheriff's department. They actually had a big celebration party that night, and all the sheriff's investigators were there, and they had big signs out that they got him. And somebody at that party actually called at my house and asked for Steve. And my daughter said he's not here, and they said, oh no, he's in jail where he belongs. We later had this call traced, and it was from that house. Since my son's been out, we've never heard from the victim's family. I mean, they've gone through a horrible thing too, but I know myself, if this was in my situation, I'm sure I'd have to call the fellow up and say, I'm awfully sorry you did 20 years, you're a victim too. But we had wonderful community support. When Steve did get out, the courtroom was jammed. There was cameras from Buffalo to New York City. It was the biggest thing that happened in Oneida County. Barry Scheck came in, which made the courthouse rumble. And it was just so overwhelming. After Steve got out, we couldn't thank enough the Innocent Project in New York City. We went down, my son and my younger son and my daughter. We just had to go down in 2 weeks and thank everybody at the Innocent Project. And they had a big pizza party for us, and Barry Scheck had his whole staff in there. And he came in and spoke to his people and said, when I went to Oneida County, I never seen the courtroom so packed. It was like the whole county knew this kid was innocent of the jury. And that's exactly how it was. I mean, nobody could believe he got convicted. And we just had to thank everybody they actually gave my son back his life. My son, after we talked to the DA after they released him, which we had a wonderful DA in Scott McNamara, he said to me, you know, Sylvia, you have to realize Steve would have never gotten home. I was thinking he's got 25 to life. In 5 years, if the worst that happens and we can't get him out, he's going to be home in 5 years. It's never going to happen. Because when you have a murder conviction and they tack life on the end of it, you'll never get out if you don't show remorse, and you're never going to get out if you don't admit to it. And either one my son could never do because he didn't do it. So my son would have died in that prison. My son was a walking dead man who never would have got out. I would have gone to my grave with him in prison. And the best thing that happened after Steve got out, besides him being free, was it gave the rest of my children their lives back. I hadn't seen my children laugh and smile in 20 years. And what a lot of people don't know this story. Steve had a brother that was exactly a year older than him, 2 hours of having the same birthday. Steve was arrested on March 25th, 1988, and 5 years later on the same day, his older brother died of a lung infection. So I've got one son in prison, one in the grave, and my younger son, was 17 when Steve was convicted. It was 3 weeks before his graduation. He never went to his high school graduation. He was in therapy and in and out of counseling for 20 years. So I had a son in the grave, a son doing life, and a son so messed up, he hardly wanted to live. My 2 daughters were able to cope, but through our faith, and thank God for the Innocent Project, and thank God for DNA, we never gave up. We never gave up hope. We never gave up praying. We never give up trying. And that was the key to it. You never, ever can give up, no matter how many times you get knocked down. We got knocked down so many times in 20 years that I used to go in the shower and cry so none of the kids could see me crying. I originally found out about the Innocent Project in 1992. I seen Barry Scheck and Peter Neufeld on Phil Donahue's show. And I immediately called the TV station, where was I going to get a hold of him, and I wrote Phil Donahue, and I got Barry Scheck's address at Cardozo Law School in New York. I was the 18th letter that Innocent Project in New York ever received. Steve was client number 0018, the lowest number to ever be exonerated. And I wrote to him, I still have the original letter, and Peter Neufeld wrote back to me and said, we're going to try to help your son, send us the transcripts, we want a letter from Steve. Steve sent a letter, I sent diagrams of the crime scene, and after about 2 years, they haggled finding the evidence, they finally found it, and we were going for DNA testing, and I'm like, boy, Steve's coming home, you know? He didn't do this is new DNA, they're going to prove he's innocent. 1996, we got the results, and it was one of the worst years since he was convicted because the Innocent Project called me up and said it was inconclusive. They didn't have enough fluid to do the test. There wasn't enough in the rape kit, and I had to go to prison and tell him, you're not coming home. And for about a year or two, we were devastated. I mean, we were just so, we didn't know what to do next, you know. And he had a law student who worked on his case named Christine Doyle, and she graduated and she went on to work for Amnesty International, and she kept on Steve's case. And we'd send her a little money, and she'd try to go get newfound evidence. And she really worked on his case for about 5 or 6 years. And then we got more money together. We sent her $25,000, and we got a private investigator, and she got statements from guys that were in Oneida County Jail that heard deals being made with this jailhouse snitch. And then all of a sudden, oh, we're going to prepare a 440 motion, and we don't get any more letters. And Steve writes, and his letters are returned. And I'm thinking, how could she put 10 years in Steve's case and walk off with our money? And I thought that's what happened. I even wrote Elliot Spitzer, our famous lieutenant governor, and every answer. And I'm like, wow, what are we going to do now? And I didn't find out until 2003 when I contacted the Innocent Project. I wrote Barry Scheck, and I said, this was a student. I mean, could you help us out? He got a private investigator, and this girl was in a horrific automobile accident, and she's, to this day, still in a coma, tucked away in an institution. And they went all our records. Thank God I had another copy of the transcripts because her family just, everything went out. So it kind of stayed dormant for about 2 years, and then 2 years ago, May of 2007, my younger son, Sean, got on the internet, and he found out there was an Innocent Project nationwide conference in Boston, Mass. And he said, Mom, I'm going this weekend, and I'm putting a face with my brother's case. I'm bringing his transcripts, I'm bringing his newspaper clippings, and I got to beg him, take another look at Steve's case, he's innocent. And Sean did exactly that. He called me every 2 hours. Mom, I'm talking to Peter Neufeld, I'm talking to this exoneree, I got the case coordinator, I'm stoning this guy, I'm not going to leave him alone until he promises me he'll take another look at Steve's case. DNA is updated, maybe they can prove his innocence. And then about 2 months later, he got an email, and the case coordinator says, well, we're looking at it. And that was in March, and in August, one night, I got a phone call, and she said, this is Mandy DeLone, Executive Director of Innocent Project, who is right under Barry Scheck and Peter Neufeld. We're reopening your son's case. And I just started crying. I said, thank you so much. And she said, tell Steve he'll be expecting a letter from us. We're going to take it back on and see what we can do for him. So I called the chaplain in the office the next day, and they said, who's calling? And I said, Steve Barnes' mom. And they said, is it good news or bad news? I said, it's good. So she came on, and she said, what's going on? And I said, you go down to the cell and tell Steve he's got to call me immediately. The Innocent Project is taking on Steve's case again. And Steve said she walked down, and the chaplain doesn't come unless you almost always got a death in the family or somebody's growing sick. And he looked at the chaplain and he said, "What's the matter?" And she said, "You got to call your mom." And he said, "Is it bad news?" And she said, "No, it's not. Just call your mom." So I said, "Steve, they're reopening your case." And that was in August. And it took until May, dickering back and forth with the district attorney of last year to get the evidence, what they wanted tested. And the district attorney wanted everything tested, and 20 items went to the lab. It went to the lab in May, and the lawyer called me June 16th and said, "They're starting the testing today." And I said, "Well, how long does this take?" And she said, "Average is 3 to 6 months. This evidence is 25 years old. It may take up to a year, and it may come back inconclusive again." They never gave us any false hope at all. So, I mean, we held on to that little shoestring of a hope that, please God, let there be one little thing that they can get DNA on. And it was 5 months and 5 days later. Larry Golden had orchestrated an Innocent Project conference in Utica, and it just so happened that Steve's attorney at the Innocent Project was going to be the guest speaker. And I had never met her personally. I talked to her on the phone every week for months. And my daughter and I went down, and I got up every day and spoke about my son's case, except on Saturday when it was my visiting day to go see Steve. And she told me that night that they had just got the results back, and it was a mixed sperm. There was 4 or 5 sperms, and I thought, this can't be happening, There's supposed to be one person. It wasn't my son, and he's going home. She said, "Sylvia, this is going to be tough. It's going to be tough. It's going to take a lot longer." And I just looked at her. She said, "I'll never forget your words." I said, "He's not going to be home for the holidays, is he?" Because I had figured out 6 months was before Christmas. He'd be home for Christmas. Well, Thanksgiving wasn't so bad, but boy, I hadn't had a Christmas tree in 20 years. I sure wanted him home for the holidays. And so I met with Larry, and he had Roy Brown, another exoneree, there. And my daughter and I got out in the car, and I'll never forget, we just put our head down and we just sobbed. And I said, "I thought it was going to be over." And my daughter's like, "Mom, what else are we going to do?" And the next morning I called my son and Sean, who had moved to Austin, Texas, and I was just sobbing my heart out. And I said, "Sean, it's not one person. It's 4 or 5 people, and it's not going to be a slam dunk." And I couldn't stop crying, and he kept saying, "Mom, take a deep breath, I said, "I can't. I'm so tired of it. What are we going to do?" And I said, "If this doesn't work, we're going to get a private investigator. I'm going to sell the house," because I had no money left. I had used all my retirement, my parents' inheritance, my kids used their inheritance. I put $10,000 on my credit card. We were out of money. And he said, "Mom, I'm going to get a hold of this Marvin Gant, who's one of the greatest private investigators in the country." And he did. And he said, "Look, your brother's in the greatest hands with Barry Scheck. If that falls through and it's inconclusive, then we'll talk." And it was almost ironic, because a week from the following Friday, I came home and my husband said to me, "You got to call the Innocent Project," which wasn't unusual because they keep me abreast every week or so. And I called, and the secretary said, "Well, I was on another line." And I said, "Well, it's my granddaughter's birthday, and I'm going down to my daughter's because I promised her I'd be there when she got off the bus. Have her call me there." And so by the time I got 5 miles down to my daughter's house, she said, "Mom, you got to call the Innocent Project." And she said, "Steve just called," because Steve called every Friday at 4 o'clock to make sure we were coming to visit on Saturday. And she said, "I told him, call back in half an hour. Mom's got to call into the Innocent Project." And I got in the door, and I called her, and I said, "Hi, Alba." And she said, "Hi." And she said, "Are you gearing up for Thanksgiving?" And I said, "Not really." I said, "We always held out hopes that Steve would be home." And she said the most wonderful words I'll never forget. She said, "Sit another place at the Thanksgiving table. Your son will be home for Thanksgiving." And I kind of lifted up in the air, and I thought, I'm not hearing this right. And I said, "What did you say?" And she said, "Your son's coming home Tuesday. They're releasing him." And I said, "Alba, I can't believe this. I mean, where's the big sperm, and what's happened?" And I knew that the Wednesday before, she called me up and said, "Tell Steve they're coming down from the lab in the DA's office, and they're taking a swab." And he said, "Mom, they come down and swab my cheek 20 times, twice, and we sealed it the way it went, and they wished me good luck." And it was 7 days later. The district attorney got a call at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on Friday and said, it was our worst nightmare. We had got an innocent man in prison. He actually called the Innocent Project at 2:15 and said, "Steve Barnes is innocent. It's excluded him. I've called the prison. He's coming back on Monday, and we're releasing him home on Tuesday. He'll be home for Thanksgiving." And I said to the attorney, "Do we have to go back for a retrial?" And I'm thinking, we waited all these years, now all of a sudden it's like slam dunk and boom. I just talked to the lawyer last week, and we probably looking another year or two fighting. She said, I can't believe it either. I'm stunned, you know. They got 2 clear profiles. It's not Steve. He's coming home. So I immediately called my son in Texas, and I said, Sean, are you sitting down? And he said, should I be, Mom? And I said, yeah. He said, your brother's coming home. And he just started crying and sobbing. He said, Mom, is our nightmare over? Our 20 years of nightmare's done. We can get on with our life? And I said, yeah. In the meantime, I was on the cell phone because inmates can't call or collect on a cell phone. And he called my daughter's phone, and she accepted the charges, and she said, Mom's got to talk to you. And I'd asked the lawyer before, I said, would you like to tell him because you did this? And she said, no, you're his mother. You're going to tell him he's coming home. So I picked up the phone, and I said, Steve, I couldn't wait another minute to tell him. I said, you're coming home. And he goes, I'm coming home, Mom? And I go, yeah. And he just let out a war whoop to all the guards and all the inmates, and he goes, I'm coming home, man. My nightmare's over. And you hear all the guards cheering and all the inmates crying and the bars are banging. And I said, Steve, you got to call the lawyer. She's not going to leave the office until you call. And I could call me right back. So what the lawyer had to tell him was, you're getting picked up on Monday, and tell your mother to get you a suit of clothes. And so Steve called right back, and he says, Mom, you got to go get me a suit and shoes and everything, suit and tie, and I don't have anything. And he said, are you coming tomorrow? And I said, Steve, you need to visit more tomorrow than ever. I said, we got a lot to talk about. And in the meantime, all the guards knew Steve's case. One of the guards, he had the occasion to go down tonight and pick up an inmate. And when he was waiting, there was a copy of the OD, and Steve's case broke, and he came back to the jail, and everybody knew it. So every time we went for a visit, they'd say, any news on Steve? You know, and he'd get the results of the DNA. So that day, I went in to be processed, which is another nightmare. And I said, guess what, guys? This is my last visit. And they said, your son's coming home. And I said, yeah, I got the results yesterday. It's excluded Steve, and I've told you all these years he's innocent, and he'll be out of here Monday. And when we went into the visiting room, I said to the guard, this is it. You know, I'll never be back here. And he went over to Steve, and Steve came in, and he just took me in his arms and started crying. And the guard shook out his hand. He said, I'm going to do something I never did to an inmate, Steve. He said, I'm going to shake your hand. He said, you told me years ago you were innocent. I believed you then. And he said, you got it proven today. Thank God we had the DA that we did, because he later on told me that when he called the prison and told him that he had an innocent man there to bring him back on Monday, the warden said, well, send the paperwork, and, you know, we'll get him home in here about 3 weeks. He said, no. He said, this is the DA calling. You will have him home for Thanksgiving. And Steve would have been released on that Monday, but Barry Scheck was flying up from New York City, and this is when he gets a lot of his donations, is when he's at the release. It's a big publicity day, and Barry Scheck's plane wasn't getting in until Monday night, so they had to take Steve back tonight to county jail, and he said it was the longest night of his entire life. They left the light on all night. He got no sleep. He was so sleep deprived, he was slurring his words by the time he got out the next morning. And when they brought him in, it was like, they let me see him for 2 minutes on Monday behind a glass. It was the first time I've ever had to see my son behind glass. He was just so slurry and so excited, and the guards went over the correctional facilities from the state and gave me his belongings in a paper bag, and Steve gave everything away. He only brought home 2 sets of underwear and 2 pairs of socks because there's so many guys in there that don't have a lot of clothes and a TV and everything else. He left everything and came home with only his photographs and all his legal papers, and they gave me my son's belongings in a big plastic bag. And they said, good luck, and they said, what an emotional departure we had with your son. The guards were crying, Steve was crying, the inmates were crying, and I said, thanks a lot for everything, guys, but I hope I never see you again. And when they brought Steve in the morning, it was like he was a hardened felon criminal. He was all chained up with the chains around his waist, and he could hardly shuffle in, and they got guards all around him, which I thought was ridiculous. And then when the judge ordered that the chains be dropped, they made such a ceremony out of it. Larry was there. And they just let the chains just drop, and it just went clunk. And you could just hear, everybody was just like, you could hear a pin drop. And Steve looked up to the sky. They got a picture of him in the paper, and he's like, please, God. My heart was hammering so hard. I said, God, you got me through 20 years. Just get me through a couple more minutes. I'm going to be out of here. And then they said, the district attorney said, you know, if this case came about 20 years ago, he wouldn't even been arrested. And he apologized, and he said, you know, we're asking that the charges be dismissed, and they dismissed the charges, and they let Steve go. And I have a picture here of him because the day they sentenced my son, they let me go in for 2 minutes to see him, and Steve was so shackled up that he couldn't even wipe away his own tears. I had to take a tissue and wipe away his tears, and I said, Steve, don't worry about this. You know, your lawyer told me that you're not going to do any of these 20 years. We'll get you out in a year and appeal. And I'll never forget wiping away his tears and feeling so helpless. And the day they released him, I was wiping away his tears, but this time they were tears of joy because he was so glad to be coming home. And then January 9th, I'm sorry, they exonerated Steve. We went to court again, and it was a whole new ball game because Steve had gone out and got his permit, driving to court. The lawyers came up from the Innocent Project, the social workers, and the courtroom was packed again, and they went through the charges one by one, and my son flew back home again for Texas, and as they went through each charge one by one and read everything my son was convicted of and asked it to be dismissed, my son just put his head down, my son Sean, and every line that they read, he just sobbed and sobbed. It was just like you could hear him all over the courtroom. And it was like this blood finally let loose. And the district attorney said, even though I think our system is the best in the country, it failed you, Mr. Barnes, and for this I'm very sorry, and I hope you accept my apology. And my son, being the great person he is, he left his podium and he went over to Scott McNamara, the DA, and he says, I accept your apology. He said this wasn't on your watch, and you came to bat, and I thank you for that. The judge didn't even apologize to my son. The only thing he said was, it showed an awful lot of character on your part to, you know, accept his apology and all for the hardships you've been through, but, you know, you're free to go home now. And even Barry Scheck said it was one of the few exonerations he'd been to that the judge never apologized. But that's very typical, you know, they never want to admit they're wrong. And the next day, the sheriff who was the big investigator has a big article in the paper. Well, he still really didn't know whether he was innocent, even though DNA testing was 99.9% proof that he was. And the presiding judge said, well, at the time, he got a fair trial. And that's the story of our judicial system. I don't wish it on anybody. It's a story that if you don't have even these guys, I mean, they did the 20 years. I can't imagine what they went through. I can only speculate what my son went through. I still see him at night when he wakes up and he doesn't know where he is and he's looking for the bars. And nobody can understand what I went through as a mother. It shouldn't happen to anybody. The best advice I can give anybody in this room, and these guys probably could too, is when my son got questioned for 12 hours, 3 days after the murder, and he's 19 years old and begged to call his mother, and they let him have a phone call, and they didn't know until midnight where he was. Don't ever cooperate. Because my son thought, well, I have nothing to hide, you know? They can search my body, they can search my truck, whatever they'll find. Any lousy little hair they found in my son's truck said had a similarity. Don't ever think that because you have nothing to hide that they won't try to railroad you, because they will, and they did. I strongly, if you go away with one message in this room, if you ever get stopped, make sure you call your lawyer or a family member before you say a thing or let them do anything. Unfortunate, because I didn't bring my kids up that way, but that's exactly what happens. You have nothing to hide, but they'll take something that you think is just a little minute thing, and before you know it, you're convicted. And that's exactly what happened in my son's case.
So thank you very much, Sylvia.
I need to make one quick announcement, which I forgot about. You reminded me when you said Amnesty International. Amnesty International has